Okay, good day, everybody, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Just as usual, please put through some of the questions that you may have in the Q&A section. Other than that, happy to participate in the chats that we have from time to time. Okay, welcome everybody. As I said, good day to everyone. I think it's time that we get started. Thank you very much again for participating and registering for the session. Today we'll be focusing on the MICE sector and a very important sector within the tourism environment, and often sometimes neglected and not focused on. And today we're essentially going to be just speaking about the MICE sector. However, before we start and introduce my members, panelists, I've asked Chifua from TBCSA, whom you should remember from the last webinar that we had. I just want him to kind of give us an update from the last webinar and the request that we had sent out to everybody, an update of where we're at and essentially what the next steps are. Chifua will just join us for 5 minutes, 10 minutes rather, and then he leaves and we get on to the subject itself. So Chifua, all over to you.
Thank you, Sisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope we are all doing fine under the circumstances. In the last webinar that we did, we talked about a few things as an update to the industry to really show you what we were doing and what we are continuing to do. And for now, I just want to give you feedback. In the previous webinar, we talked about submissions that we had to make in order for us to put together, a compelling case for the recovery. We have received over 3,000 submissions. We have gone through the submissions. We're still coming through some of those. As soon as we finish coming through some of those, which is going to be anytime this week, we will start to pull together the document, and the document will be submitted to government as part of your input on the recovery. So that work has gone on very well, and I just want to thank you for submitting those inputs, and that will go a long way in ensuring that the recovery is inclusive and everyone was party to this recovery. So that's quite important. The work that we're doing and completing is the work around protocols, and we have published some of the protocols in terms of where we are. They are not complete yet. I know that some people are saying, some of them may be draconian, and some people are saying they are fine, and some people are saying there are a few things that needs to be changed. We have a team that we've assembled that's meeting at this present moment to look at the protocol. The team is coming from the entire value chain of tourism, from small businesses to big businesses, independent, listed businesses, and so forth and so on, to make sure that we look at these protocols and we look at the practicality of implementation and how is it going to work, how much is it going to cost for small business to implement these things, and what is it that we can do to assist. So it is important that we complete this work to make sure that we de-risk the industry so that we can go back to some level of operation. So that work has gone on very well, and I want to thank you for that. And the next step, as I've said, is that we're going to present this to government, to the minister from the recovery point of view. Recovery goes hand in hand with protocols. We cannot recover if we don't put some protocols or some measures to mitigate the spread of the virus. It goes hand in hand to make sure that we de-risk, then we go back to operation. If we don't de-risk, we risk a situation where we're going to be like certain mines that have opened, and then they discover that there is a coronavirus in the mines, then they close. Then you have the situation of going forward, and then you go backwards. So we need to be careful of that. And we need to make sure that whatever we put on the table of government, it's something that government can say that we're serious, and government can say that the industry is committed to ensuring there's no spread of this virus. And I think that's the biggest part. It's not that these protocols that we're putting together are going to continue to be what they are. If the risk of the spread of the virus is less, it means that the lesser the protocols to be applied, or for companies to be made to follow. So if we all of a sudden get into a situation whereby we have we're on level 1 of this vaccine. So it means that the protocols, will also be, reduced. So it's not permanent situation. I want everyone to understand it's not permanent. It's to make sure that we can go back to some level of activity. As soon as we go into the level of activities, as soon as the virus is less, then the less the restrictions. Sorry, I've got the soldiers, with the Spitfire on top of my house. I don't know what's going on. But that is the feedback. That is the work that we've done, and we want to thank you for that. And we will give you the final document in terms of what has been achieved. And just remember, it's not always going to be suitable for everyone. We're going to have to make compromises. We're going to have to consolidate the information. We're going to have to make sure that whatever we do is to the interest of all of us and to the interest of the country. So that's quite important. And the last from me is that, we are in this together. We are doing this together. We're in this situation, all of us, whether we're in big business or small business, we are all suffering together. And as the TBCSA will continue to do the work and include those that are within TBCSA and outside of the TBCSA to make sure that we have, the full voice of the industry. It's important that we all stick together at this time and we make sure that we submit something that government will say the industry have spoken and this is what the industry is doing to mitigate the spread of the virus. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chifiwa, and we certainly had your private jet warming up there for you. And some are luckier than others. And I think I just want to echo, the gratitude that I want to say to the sector for making those contributions, and actually certainly trying to drive through as one voice as possible. And I think, it also is a potentially an exciting time when the president has announced that he'd like to see the country move towards level 3 as soon as possible, by the end of the month. And at the same time, there's a double whammy where the sector in itself is de-risking. And what a lovely opportunity it could be if it's de-risked to actually a level that coincides with the level that we're moving towards. That will be a perfect happy storm, as it were, for the sector going forward. So thank you very much, Chifiwa. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
So let's go back today on the focus point, which is around the mice sector. And today I'm joined by two panelists, that are quite instrumental in this space. And I'll start with ladies first. Projeni Pather, who's the chairperson of the Association of African Exhibition Organisers, AAXO. Thank you very much for joining us. Then he's also joined by Glenton de Kock, who's the CEO of the South African Association for the Conference Industry, SAACI. And I'm sure many of you are aware as to who they are. Before we start, I'm just going to give them about 5 minutes or so just to introduce themselves, what their different associations are and what they do, and then we can get into the thick of things. So over to you, Projeni.
Thank you so much, Sisa. Well, as you mentioned, I'm Projeni Pather and I am the chair of AAXO. AAXO is the Association of Exhibition Organisers. So we, an organizer-driven exhibition, we focus on developing and growing exhibition organizers in our industry and supporting our infrastructure, and that is our suppliers and our venues within the industry as well. So our organization is focused on providing development of skills, providing international standards, innovation trends to ensure that exhibitions in South Africa is of a very high level and that we attract international visitors, attract local visitors from province to province, and we act as a conduit between the buyer and the seller, creating basically business for various industry sectors.
Perfect, thank you. Nice and sweet there, much appreciated. Glenton, over to you.
Lisa, thanks, and good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for dialing in or tuning in. SAACI, and most people on the call know that SAACI sometimes is referred to as the grand old lady of the business events industry. This year, celebrating 34 years. Next year is the 35th anniversary or birth of SAACI as an association within Southern Africa. And I think the core for us is simplistic at this stage. We've been saying, it's okay not to be okay. You know, people always ask, like, how are you feeling? Our response is, you can say that you're not feeling fine, because this is really not normal. And I think in the existence of SAACI, two things were paramount for us. One, sustainability of our industry, and I think that more so than ever before. And second is, how do we drive the new frontiers? You know, everybody's speaking about the new normal. You know, for us, it's the next normal. It's the new frontier. So within our association, we've got a variety of members across the sector in terms of value chain, whether it's a PCO, professional conference organizer, whether it's a venue, an AV company, students, event management companies, destination marketing companies, hotels, transportation. So we've got quite a variety of membership in the value chain. And I'm sure during the conversation in the next couple of hours, we'll touch on a number of those issues because it's quite complex. But as I said, you know, to most people, I'm quite comfortable in knowing that if you're not feeling okay, it's okay to say that.
Thank you, Glenton.
So,
much appreciated. Yeah. Thank you very much, and much appreciated from your perspective there. I think just to kick off the conversation, you know, just to build up the context, you know, the MICE sector is what is known as the folly, you know, first out, last in. And remember at the beginning of the pandemic itself, you know, that was probably just about mid-February. We were watching the number of conferences, the number of meetings, you know, exhibitions, especially in the East, you know, they were being canceled on a daily basis, you know, in Singapore, etc., and everywhere else. And at the time, naive as we were, we thought, well, here's an opportunity to actually get all of those coming down to South Africa and bid for them. But, you know, a lot has happened since then. Can maybe you guys share in terms of, to date, what have you experienced within the MICE sector? Give us a bit of a sense in terms of your particular members and your constituency, and also maybe share some global insights as to what we see. There's a lot of questions around the MICE sector, and sometimes those that are not intimate with it would make big pronouncements on it. And I think here's an opportunity to tease some of those elements out there. Everyone is speaking about a recovery plan. You know, does MICE need a separate recovery plan? Or is it a subsector within the bigger tourism one? And I think I just want to flesh those out. But I think the first and foremost, you know, in terms of what's your sense in terms of to date, what is the pain that I suppose being felt in the sector, and what does the future outlook look like? And any one of you can kind of unmute yourself and please go for it.
Thanks, Sisa. So in terms of exhibition, the exhibition industry as a whole, I mean, we've come to a standstill, as we all know, and all of us had to go into plans to postpone. But obviously there is great uncertainty. None of us have a crystal ball as to when this is going to be lifted and when we're going to be allowed again. So everybody's looking to find alternative dates in the calendar. Within the next 6 months, I think the calendar for the rest of the year isn't the way it used to be last year. And the difficulty there is obviously, especially with venues, is that they're also struggling to accommodate us all. So we're all trying to get dates or tentative dates within a time frame within the next 6 months, for example. Then it moves again. And then obviously venues can't accommodate us as well. And then at the same time, we're trying to get tentative dates for the new year, because there's a great feeling in the industry as well that there might be no events for the rest of the year. We have a combination, obviously, of larger organizers and small, medium organizers as well, with a combination of both business and consumer events. So it's disrupted the entire calendar, let's be honest. And together with that, if we look at the impact that it's had on all our service providers as well, is even larger, because we rely very heavily on these service providers. And as I mentioned in one of my interviews before that I did, was that we have an ecosystem, you know, that each of us as event and conference and exhibition organizers have, that we work with in order to make these events viable. So those particular industries, those service providers also have come to a grinding halt with no way of knowing when business is going to be reignited for us as an industry. So there's been a lot of fear, there's been a lot of anxiety. Everybody went into panic mode initially, of course. But what has been nice to see, I must admit, at this point in time, it's been wonderful to see those service providers starting to look outside the arena because of the uncertainty and saying, okay, we don't know when exactly we're going to come on again. So what else can we do to sustain ourselves in the meantime? And obviously their services, they are quite resourceful in being able to provide different resources for not just exhibitions and conferences, but I've seen service providers going into providing equipment and resources in terms of what is required for sanitization purposes within shopping centers and malls and retail outlets and those kind of things. And obviously preparing for when we do come online is important as well, because if government says to us, yes, we can operate within the next 2 months, how do we operate and do we have the resources to be able to do so safely?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Projeni. Glenton?
So yeah, just to contextualize, and I think the ecosystem is one that is sometimes misunderstood with, I think, with the broad society for all intents and purposes. So let me maybe just sketch an analogy for us, and then I can get to sort of clarity around what we've seen within the particular space. So let's take the Titicaca forest as an example. You know, the economy is in the Titicaca forest. The forest, in terms of the trees, represents different sectors of industry, whether it's mining, pharmaceutical, finance, automotive. Those particular trees are supported by roots, you know, and I've been explaining the roots as the events industry. You know, the events industry support those trees. So the events industry across the board, exhibitions, conferences, are in essence growing, and not growing themselves, but they grow in other sectors of society or other sectors of the industry. So without the roots, the tree can't, without the tree, the roots can't survive, and without the roots, the tree can't survive. And I think when we look at what's happened in a particular sector, a number of other industries, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's association meetings, and I remember when we were at the meeting with the minister on the 9th of March, and you presenting, you know, specifically around the effect that COVID-19 has had on the event industry, it has been extremely huge. So our industry was closed way before lockdown, which ultimately meant that in the period that we've been in lockdown, we've been also seen and have seen in the past how the events industry is able to bounce back quite quickly. We've seen it in the last 7 days when Germany has come out of and easing their lockdown. The immediate thing they did was say to the different states or regions, you know, venues or exhibitions are then allowed. So I think as a destination, the importance of business events needs to, in this instance, need a little bit more priority. And while the de-risking factors are clear, and we've done a lot of work around the protocols from SAACI's perspective with our colleagues in the eventing space as such, the clarity is that without, you know, the events industry thriving other sectors of society, and I said it before, and I'm probably jumping in terms of the recovery process here. When corporate South Africa goes back, business events needs to be activated at the same time as well. And I think when you look at what's happening around the globe again, and we've been watching Germany quite closely, and I mean China has also gone active now in terms of some of the exhibitions. The clarity that we're going to have for members and people on the call is it's always going to have to be people first now. It's going to be about health and safety protocols first now. And as we gradually take the steps into this recovery, we all have to rely on each other to be very mindful of how we put these activities together as well. So it's been tough. It's been really, really tough for businesses in this space because of the ecosystem and the complexities of it. But I think the opportunity exists in the period that we are in now to fully appreciate 2 things as the industry. One, we are really highly regulated. You know, whether you're doing an event at the Dome or Captain ICC, whether we're doing in Durban, in Durban, you have to have a venue operating center. You have to have a jock. You know, so we've got all of these regulations in play. All that we're adding to it now is the sanitation part, is health and safety, is pre-screening. And in addition to that, there's a lot of aspects, whether it's about infrared reading or facial recognition, a lot of that activities or services already exist in the country. So I do think that at times, and I think I said it to you a day or two, I cringe when the president spoke when he moved us from level 5 to level 4. And he spoke about this mass gatherings, and as mass gatherings came out, the next thing he said was like conferences and exhibitions. And I sort of said to myself, the narrative needs to be the following: we're not mass gatherings. Mass gatherings for me, with no disrespect intended, it's a beer festival. When you're talking business events or exhibitions, it's an organized event, and because it's organized, the tracking and tracing that's required by the Department of Health can be comfortably done within our particular sector as such. That's a brief answer.
I think on the back of that, Glenton, here's a question for you from Solly Moeng of Africa Brand Summit. And just give some context to it. When you mention the word MICE, essentially, you have a mental picture of many people gathering, thousands of people gathering over 3 or 4 days in a confined space, shaking hands every 10 minutes and during tea breaks and everything else there. And I think that's probably the mental image that many people have, right? Yeah. Now, the question that Solly is saying is that in terms of MICE, surely you could recommend that smaller group events happen first with all the safety terms and conditions, then increase that over the numbers over time. What's your view around that approach?
So our push has been in the last couple of days, and it's part of the conversations that we've had within the TBC's working groups as such. And again, no malice intended here, but a simple example is, at the moment, unfortunately, and I've overnight I've heard another loss of a close family friend as such, so funerals, you allowed 50 people. The challenge with the funeral is, as we know, in some of our communities, some of our families, 50 is the number. What I'm probably appealing to whoever's listening from a government perspective, particularly the Department of Health, as a baby step approach within level 3, 0 to 50 should be as a starting point. To do 2 things: obviously build confidence, to show that the industry is clear in terms of what they wanting to do. But there have been a number of couples that have postponed. They haven't cancelled, but they postponed their weddings. There's a number of people that want to have birthdays, mitzvahs. And I think in the smaller groupings and also for smaller venues as well, that the 0 to 50 space needs to be part of that initial phasing in, because that will give us as a sector demonstrating to the health department and to government that everything has
Glenton, you're breaking up there a bit, mate. Maybe when you just need to switch off your video and disconnect the audio.
In terms of recording who attends, who doesn't attend, as a starting point. I think if we belabor that, and somebody made an interesting comment about the fact that kids are going to be allowed to go back to school. Are you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Apologies for that. Am I better there now?
Yeah, I think maybe switch off your video so we can just maybe it's a bandwidth issue.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Am I still there, sister?
All right. Maybe let me just, once you're sorting out your bandwidth stuff, let me just ask Projeni a question here. There's a question that's come from...
Can you hear me now? Cool.
Sorry, Glenn. I'm just going to... Okay. Projeni, there's a question here from Ryan Wallace, who says, great to see Germany separating exhibitions from mass gatherings. Can we try to get government in SA to take the same view? And I suppose, yeah, what he's trying to tease out in terms of, some of the measures that could potentially be introduced in order to accelerate the sector coming back online again, right? And maybe just look at from is it commercially viable to do that? Is it something, an option that we could look at as well?
Absolutely. I think, the big thing is obviously whether it's commercially viable. I think that is really, really important for us to assess as organizers. And currently, we're working as, we have our Event Safety Council that we're working with, that we established. The Event Safety Council is part of the South African Event Council. So all our event associations have come together in an effort to put together a framework that would guide our exhibitions and events. Now, this framework will help us decide how we operate at an exhibition. Now, Glenton just mentioned just now, Sisa, talking about, you know, the minimum of 50, if we can allow 50 or maybe push it up to 100. And it had been at that point in time that a mass gathering is a maximum of 100 people. But I think when you look at exhibitions as a whole, it is a different ballgame. Because at a conference, you have the same amount of people that is there from beginning to end, that have registered. With an exhibition, on the other hand, there is a rotation of visitors. So you have people coming in at different times and leaving at different times. So there's a slightly different framework that needs to be considered when we look at exhibitions. So if we're looking at a maximum of 50 people, we need to understand, and that's what our Safety Council is busy working on right now as well, is how, within what given time frame are those 50 to 100 people allowed in your venue, and what is the size capacity of the venue? So is it in 1,000 square meters, I can allow 200 people in a 2-hour time frame, and that's how I rotate? So those are the kind of questions that we need to dig deeper into. And what intrigues me, and I think what would be interesting for us all to find out, is when I look at, for example, shopping centers right now and retail outlets that have been opened. I've been looking for regulations, and I don't know if anybody else has had the opportunity to find regulations that have been set out for shopping centers and retailers with a framework. We work, as we have clients that are in that industry, and I've asked them as well, what type of framework have they been given in order to open their stores? And they've put together their own guidelines based on the overarching guidelines the Department of Health has put out there. So there isn't a particular guideline. So one store might say, I'm not only allowing 1 in 4 square meters. And another store is saying, well, I'm allowing 1 in 8 square meters. So we are a shopping environment, if you think about it. We're putting businesses together. There is a business-to-business transaction that is going on. But the difference between shopping centers and malls and retailers is that, like Glenton mentioned earlier, we have a more controlled environment. We're able to track and trace. We know exactly every single person that has entered there. We have their details. We're able to allow pre-registrations as well. So with pre-registrations, we can say that you only allowed there between 9 and 12, and that is your time frame. Whereas a shopping center can't allow that. And so that's what confuses me to a certain extent, is that there is no framework. So what is the guidelines and what is the guidance, and can we lean on that if there is? So those are some of the questions we've been talking about as an industry. And I think we need to flesh it out. But again, the reason we're putting together the framework as the Event Safety Council is to ensure that we provide guidance to government to show them that we know what we're doing. We are acting responsibly, we're acting safely. It's always safety first in terms of the people that attend our events. And yes, business will follow, but I think anybody who goes out there, who goes into a business environment or a retail environment, you want to ensure safety first.
Perfect. So I think the essence coming through there, regulated industry quite a lot, and in terms of the ability to track and trace is something that is top of mind from your space then. Glenton, I'm picking up a couple of chats here, and maybe you may want to explain in terms of what's TBCSA's relationship with SAACI and how do you fit into that space? Are you able to kind of pick that up and just kind of clarify quickly?
Yeah, so obviously with the Tourism Business Council, effectively represents, as it says, the business or commercial private sector part of the tourism industry for many, many years. A number of associations, I think we're probably about 12 to 15 associations. SAACI has had a seat on the Tourism Business Council board for as long as it's been in existence. So for all intents and purposes, ourselves, whether it's a SAATA, IATA, Sarala, so everybody that's in the value chain is there sitting on the board itself. We, from a SAACI perspective, obviously represent the business events industry, and we've driven quite a lot of what our sector requires into the documentation. I know that I did make a comment to Chifiwe when they released their safety protocols. I think it's on page 10 or 11 of the document under the sort of conference and the exhibition space. You'll just see like 2 paragraphs there. And it says refer to Annexure A. Now that Annexure A is effectively, I think, some of what I picked up from Projeni's side in respect of the safety protocols. And as you rightly said, there's a meeting taking place at the moment. So we've been feeding in for many years, in particular over the last couple of weeks, around our needs and challenges. And that's why I used the analogy of the Tsitsikamma forest to just get my colleagues to understand that we've got quite an important role to play. We have been playing quite an important role. But I think it's important to note that in terms of how the minister sees things, and we've seen it in some of the internal conversations, he says that the minister, which he needs industry input, diverts from a private sector side, goes directly into the Tourism Business Council. So it's been quite important to keep that line of communication open with them. And it's been quite important for ourselves as SAACI to ensure that the business events industry's concerns are noted within that particular forum directly to the minister's office.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And again, just to kind of get the sense that, the voice is being heard and the reputation is being made, through that TBCSA then. Now part of the country's broader recovery is led domestically, then regional, then international. What impact does this then have, within the MICE sector? Because essentially at least for the medium to longer term, is that we'll be focusing, the short term will be focusing on the domestic MICE activities. Is that big enough to bring, to get the sector up and running? And what does the outlook look like in terms of just looking at the domestic play?
Sisa, I'll start off by saying that domestic would be led by Corporate South Africa. And by saying that, there is an opportunity for us to slowly get out of, and I think we need to be sort of cautious at that. There's still reservations within sort of the Health Department and the National Command Center around a rapid opening of the economy. So it's a really slow, gradual process in that regard. But the opportunity does exist for ourselves at a domestic level, and the UK is speaking about these air bridges, where effectively a low risk, let's say citizens or low risk countries would be allowed to come into the UK. And that's manageable, and they want to sort of waiver the 14-day quarantine that every country is speaking about. Now, when you look at South Africa and you look at the hardest districts, there are parts of our country where business events could be shifted to other destinations. And that's what the proviso that with all of the protocols and the health and safety issues are taken into account. But when Corporate South Africa goes back to business events will automatically activate. And by that activation approach, as I said earlier before, I had bandwidth issues, is at a social level, weddings, birthdays, funerals, gatherings, product launches as well, that companies still want to engage. So I shudder, as I've said on a number of occasions, in terms of the narrative that currently exists for our sector, in that we can only come back online in 2021. I think we really must guard against that, because that just sends out, at a pure marketing level, just sends out the wrong narrative. I think we need to look at how do we work with our clients, how do we work with Corporate South Africa, how do we work with the Department of Health that allows us to get business activating on a slow, gradual pace, unfortunately, because that's the nature of what the environment looks like at the moment. But the opportunity does exist for people on the call, and like ourselves as an association, to speak to stakeholders and speak to clients to understand what can still happen. Because while Projeni's been correct early in the conversation, a lot of what we said initially was, don't cancel, rather postpone. Now, when you postponed, understand that it could potentially be displacement of activities, because some venues would either be taken up, like the Cape Town ICC, in respect of potentially being a field hospital. So where does that displacement then go to? Where does that potential activity or conference then land in another venue or in another destination as well? So there is ways and means, and as part of the recovery conversation that we're currently having, is how do we guide industry, and how does industry guide us as well as to what recovery then effectively looks like? Because it will be varied, I think, within businesses. in respect of where that clientele and the client relationship sits, but it also be varied in respect of how government views de-risking of certain parts of our country at the moment.
Thank you.
I see, so sorry. I think another opportunity here in terms of how we operate, if we are operating domestically only for now, yes, there's some events and exhibitions, obviously, that won't be able to happen because they rely that heavily on international visitors coming in. But in the interim, there's obviously an opportunity again for the introduction of hybrid events where we, through digitization and a virtual part of the event, we're able to bring in that international visitor into our conference or into our exhibition in some way. So we need to start looking at combinations of that for now in order to sustain ourselves and sustain the event, to start the conversation and, you know, continue the narrative into the real event when we will see you again next year. So that could be part of the solution to that.
Okay, maybe let's hop on that one then. These hybrid events, are they displacing the traditional formats of MICE activities? Is it enhancement? What's your sense in terms of these hybrid events?
I think hybrid events have always been in the background. I think they've always been introduced into our events in some way or form in the past 10 years. And it's grown. I think they complement events to a great deal. The reason we're all in this industry as organizers of events and exhibitions and meetings is because of that physical contact. And that's that innate human nature that we have to make physical contact. There's a big difference between going to a meeting or a conference and being able to sit next to the CEO of Apple or yourself, Sisa, or being able to rub shoulders with somebody who you never have the opportunity to do so. And those are what meetings allow you to. It makes that physical contact, that connection, and it's the start of a relationship that unfortunately, going virtual doesn't give you that full power. Yes, we're able to connect, we're able to do this today, but are we able to just lose ourselves completely in that? I don't think so. I think it needs to be complementary. I think it all depends on your particular event, and you need to evaluate it and decide what's going to be financially feasible for you as well, financially viable, what's going to make sense for your visitor. And it all depends on what your objectives are as an event organizer. What are your objectives? And will going hybrid completely still help you meet those objectives? We also need to think about, Sisa, the fact that those physical contact events, if we went completely virtual, that just denies the economy as a whole that we feed. We lose rooms, we lose beds, we lose restaurants, we lose tourism as a whole. So we need to be very, very careful of that. Live events and physical interaction is very, very important to the industry. So I think we need to tread very carefully on how we complement it and not shy away from our physical events completely.
Thank you. Glenn, hybrid events, what's your take on it? Here to stay, game changers, or just a passing phase?
As a tool. I think as humans, we want to feel physical contact. I think the adjustment that has to be made now, and I think in the short term, is that hybrid events is here to stay with us. However, depending on how corporate South Africa and how the rest of us sort of view these sort of things, there are events, not necessarily in a hybrid format, but virtual events taking place as we speak. I mean, we're obviously on one of those, and there are many that's going to be going forward. So there is a shift that potentially, your one-day workshop or your one-day meeting might, in the short term, be affected because of us trying to get our heads around the regulations, around everything that we need to now do in this sort of the next new normal in that regard. So I think it's here to stay. And I think that in some instances, and we've seen it within our membership base, that a number of our AV companies have already pivoted into that sort of space where they are allowing online streaming, webcasting, crowdcasting, web jams, and all of these platforms that have already been there. But I think the utilization will be something that will be considered going forward. But I do not want us to discount the fact that we as human beings will still want to have physical contact and engage with each other. And I think more so now with, I think, the adjustment, particularly with yourself, Sisa, having hosted these things, you and I would be able to have stood on a platform and watch people's body language as to whether we're hitting the right notes or not, in respect of the information we're providing versus trying to read quite quickly what's happening on the chats or trying to conjure up in respect of response to the question and answer. I think it's something that's here to stay, but I think it's something that industry and clients over time will adjust as they go along. But it's not something that's going to necessarily radically change the industry where we won't have any physical contact with each other in the future.
Okay. I'm picking up certain sentiments coming through here, and I see a comment by Septi Pokula, who's saying there's a certain level of re-education that needs to be done from the perception. And I'm looking at the powers that be that think MICE is just a mass gathering, but rather reorientating it as an organized event, right? That's on one side.
Yeah.
What about the client, right? The corporate client, where is their mind space at? You know, what's your sense? Do they understand what it is, or is there some work that needs to be done in your view in terms of educating them? Are they reluctant to venture out again, or what's your sense in terms of the client? Because they're the most important, they're the ones that pay, you know. So what's your assessment? And I'll ask you, Glenn, then Projeni after. I
think it's a conversation that must happen. You know, and I think it's something that let's take. I don't want to probably pick on anybody, but let's say one of these big banking institutions. They've got a number of, or always have a number of sort of whether workshops, training events, conferences, launching of new products. It really depends where they feel and how comfortable they feel. Because when we return back to an office environment, as much as we're going to put in protocols in play, those companies are going to have to do exactly the same things as well. So there's a cost element that I think needs to be discussed and needs to be understood as well from governance perspective, because this is an additional cost that either has not been budgeted for, and for that reason, you know, when it comes to budgets, whether it's a marketing budget or a conferencing budget, and those might be affected in the short term, maybe in the long term, in the first couple of months going forward. So I think it's a conversation that I would encourage everybody to have with their clients to understand where they're at, because it would vary across the industries. You know, some sectors, whether in the law profession or in the accounting profession, have probably continued without necessarily having any major impact on their business, unlike ourselves, you know, where we've come to a complete standstill. You know, so if you're having a conversation with ourselves, it will be one of frustration. When can we operate? What can we do? Where are we going to get money from? When you speak into to those sectors I mentioned right now, they'll just say, listen, we're going to defer. We're going to still probably do our Christmas party, but come up with a creative idea in terms of how we're going to do their Christmas party, for instance, understanding all of the protocols that are in play. So there has to be, and I must encourage everybody to keep working within their clientele and within their network to fully understand and appreciate, you know, what that sentiments are at the moment, because it does vary across every sector.
Thank you, Clinton. Projeni?
Yes, you know, I think for me, education is really, really important. And I think that's one of the cores of our association in terms of educating our members. Firstly, I think that's where we need to start, educating our employees that the industry is still here to stay, and we need to be talking about the fact that we will come back and how important our events and exhibitions are to their businesses, and how we're still working very hard to ensure that we're able to deliver successfully for them. In addition to that, we spoke earlier about the South African Events Council that has been formed, which is a combination of different event associations, and I see some comments asking about that. We will send out an official press release to our industry as a whole, so that you can understand how we will operate and how we come together for things like that. And again, the SA Events Council will be responsible for some of that education. So we've got different communication plans that we put together that we will be sharing with all our associations and the industry as a whole and all our members, so that will help you educate your clients. I think during this time, we must be very careful not to be quiet, because it might be as distressing and anxious as you may be feeling right now. The last thing you want to do is be quiet. You need to let your clients know that you're still available, that you're still working on solutions, and that you will come back and you will be of assistance to them just as you have previously. That communication needs to continue. Obviously, in different environments, there are different client requirements. And then depending on the sector that you're dealing with, right now there's some sectors that are thriving and some there aren't. But we need to have those individual meetings with them, check in with them, and to ensure that we understand the circumstances under which they're operating. So when we do come back, they're able to pick up the phone and phone you because they know that you're still there. That is really important. So right now, part of our communication plan, we're focusing on sharing those memories of those events, getting testimonials from your clients about things that they've experienced, successes that they've had at your events, why they believe your meeting, your conference, your exhibition has worked for them and how it has helped their business thrive. Those are the stories that we need to tell, and we need to share it across our associations so that people know that we are here to stay and we will be coming back. That is very important. So we're going to be sharing our comms plans with you so that you can share those moments, whether it's videos and photographs or testimonials, share it with us. We've got Global Exhibitions Day coming up, Sisa, on the 3rd of June. Mm-hmm. And that is part of that campaign as well, where all our organizers and all our suppliers and infrastructure providers are going to be talking about events that they've worked on and have had great success with, and why and how they've contributed to it. So we want to share our story, and we need to spread it across the South African community as a whole, the public and business sectors, to know, so that they know that we're here and we're here for good.
So educating ourselves as the industry, educating the policymakers, call it government as it were, but also more importantly, educating the client at the end of the day is the one that's footing the bill, so that we all have a similar view of the sector and in its forward outlook. Glenton, the typically conferences, generically MICE events have a long lead time as part of the bidding process. I've got a question here from an anonymous attendee who's asking the question: what's the status regarding bidding process for MICE events across the globe? What's your sense there? Although we've come to a stop globally, are we still able to bid for conferences in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time? What's happening there?
Sisa, I think as the rest of the rest of the world sort of starts opening up, I know there was a bit of a sort of, let's say, slowing down of releasing of requests for proposals. And I know that we've been speaking quite closely to your team, Amanda, in respect of how we do that from a country perspective. I know that we've got a meeting on Friday. So our immediate sense is that we need to get back into the swing of things around bidding because of the lead times and the fact that we can be bidding now for events in 12 or 18 months' time around that's available to do just that. So our relationship with ICA, SAACI signed that particular MOU during Meetings Africa. We'll be putting them in and working quite closely with the Africa team from ICA's side to ensure that in terms of the bidding process, we don't sit back and then wait. It's really an approach that I've said to, particularly for myself, you have to really be forward. You knock on the door and find out what is happening. Because everybody at the moment now is twofold focus. One on survival, let us just survive and get through this. And then second to that is in looking in terms of what can happen going forward. So bidding, yes, without a doubt. And I think the important thing, one of the elements we want to put in play from a SAACI perspective into the recovery plan for the MICE sector is also bidding at a domestic level, so that we don't sort of look at the industry and just look at the inbound part, but also understand what events, what activities or conferences we can put out there on a platform, whether it's the Convention Bureau or ourselves, that allows companies to bid for events in South Africa as well. And I think it's important that the other sort of bigger venues will also be part of that conversation as we work towards the recovery. So simplistic to that is that bidding and RFPs should be sort of being released in the coming weeks, this month, as Europe and the rest of the world sort of take that leap of faith as the first movers to move into sort of the world of COVID-19 and come out of lockdown. And I think as a destination, we've got an opportunity here to bid for those events going forward.
Thank you, Glenn. There's a question here from Janine Hoffman, and it's all about the economics of the commercial viability rather, So will the economics of bigger venues, and smaller numbers work? Because essentially social distancing means I want bigger border space with less numbers in it, of people as it were. And that goes almost counterintuitive to what venue owners do. They look at square meterage and want the highest yield on there. How are these two seemingly contradicting views going to live together, right? Either someone's got to take a commercial knock, or you're going to increase the price. What's your sense in terms of how that balances together?
Sisa, I think pricing is something that we're going to have to be mindful of, but I think we have to be cautious as well. There's and I'm not going to mention the airline, but there's an airline that sent a note. I'm not sure if everybody else got the note, but I got the note that says, look, you can book your ticket, gave the price for the ticket, and then if you didn't want to have the person next to you in the center seat, they added an extra 780 Rand for that. And I looked at it and thought to myself, cheap as I'm actually paying to keep myself safe. Where I'm probably looking at the airline to say, look, we can fly, when we are allowed to fly, we can fly, keep the price as competitive as possible. And that goes to the business model of a venue or an airline in the sort of example I'm providing. And it's a difficult one, because I know people are probably not going to agree with me, or they might disagree with me from a pricing side. Is we need to consider that, and I know it sounds, it's what frustrates the rest of South Africa is we've got so many rules and regulations at the moment that it's starting everybody out. But what I wouldn't want to see is that we go into a price war, as we sometimes find in South Africa with different products and venues, and the pricing structures are different. Because remember that the consumer is also hurting. The customer that you've always had, or the client you've always had, is also hurting. So I think it's again goes down to how strong the relationship is, and how best you have re-engineered your business model. And it's something that we did at SAACI. Our business model we had before COVID-19 as an association doesn't match what we are doing now in terms of COVID-19. So we have to consistently re-engineer and look at that particular space. And I think most businesses have done that. If you haven't done it already, I'd probably urge you to do it as such. But the pricing, and also, as we said before, the selling of floor space and number of people in a particular venue, it's about bums in seats. And that's the unfortunate, one of those unfortunate ones that we're going to have to get comfortable with, in respect of how best do we not only play it safe, but we ensure that we are sustainable as a business or as an industry as well. Because remember that we're going to get through this storm. All of us hopefully will get through the storm, but for all intents and purposes, you don't want to find yourself, as we probably did pre-2010 and then sometime after post-2010, where pricing within certain parts of our industry, became quite a contentious one. And I wouldn't want to see venues or destinations in South Africa competing against each other because they're wanting to undercut, because then we don't want to become a cheap destination. But I would want us to become a value destination, specifically in the MICE space. But understanding that decision is a business decision. We can guide as an association, we can guide as an industry, but it really is a business decision as to what is your break-even number, and how comfortable are you to sustain your business in a very, very tight market at the moment.
Projeni, everyone's trying to make money and be commercially viable across the entire value chain. From the example that Glenton gave of the flight, right? So suddenly now someone's going to pay more to get to the venue. To get to the venue itself, only half the capacity, as an example, that's there. All of these that I'm seeing, the cost just ticking up. At what point do we start to say, "Ooh, this becomes unviable," or commercially unviable? What's your sense in terms of, social distancing, cost implications, and the venues? I'm just picking on venues, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you start looking at the framework, for example, looking at the framework that Ufi provided, and you try to visualize all of this happening, and you think about the costs that you need to incur to ensure that all these best practices are put in place along the line, it becomes a very costly exercise. But at the same time, venues don't have events right now. Venues want to fill up their venues with events. Mm-hmm. And you need the organizers to bring you events. at the same time, as organizers, we want attendees to be visiting us. We want them to come to our shows. We want them to be exhibiting with us. So our pricing has to be right in order to get through this, in order to get them on. And right now we know across industries, they're all struggling. So there has to be, I think what COVID has taught us all right now is about collaboration. And as an industry, we need to collaborate and we need to communicate. Those are really, really important points in order to get us out of this. Otherwise, we'll all come to a standstill and we'll say, nobody wants to budge. You know, venues are not going to want to budge. Organizers are not going to want to budge. And then we come back to lockdown. We'll be putting ourselves into our own lockdown, you know, self-imposed. So there has to be communication with these events because with these venues, in order to make it viable for us to, as organizers, to bring our events to them, I think that's where it all begins. We have to work together. You know, venues are not going to allow us to be there without those frameworks in place, because they're going to be guided by those frameworks, you know. And we're not going to be allowed to host events if we don't follow those frameworks. So there has to be conversation. And there won't be one size fits all solution. So that's where I believe it begins.
Okay, then there's another question from Anonymous here. It says, has there been any hint from corporates on risk? You know, if an event is held and someone does contract coronavirus, right, even with all the sanitation protocols and social distancing in place, is someone going to be held liable? And this is a liability question, you know, and just to get a bit of a sense then in terms of what other added on, you know, is it an insurable item, you know, in terms of third-party risk? What's your sense around there? Or is it a big disclaimer that enter at your own risk type thing?
Look, we're always responsible. I think you safety first, like I mentioned earlier. I'm actually talking currently with a few insurers because we're looking at putting together a webinar for our industry as a whole, talking about insurance. Insurance companies are looking at bringing out new products, and risk, assessing risk and liability are going to be a big part of it. And that is a question on all our minds. Where does that liability lie? But again, we need to ask ourselves a question. How do you prove that you picked it up at that event? Because on your way to that event, there were many stops in your journey. So how do you prove that that is where you picked it up? That is the other question. If we can prove that, then you can be held liable. So that is an entire discussion that we need to have as an industry, and obviously getting insurance brokers on board as well to explain the different products and services that will be available, and finding out from a legal perspective where we stand before we go out there.
Thank you. Glenton, I think there is general consensus and understanding that you know, collaborating and communicating becomes important, and that the MICE sector, like any other industry, is being proactive to come up with these protocols that aim to de-risk it as well. Can you give us a sense in terms of where the process is at, specifically for MICE, and when are we most likely to hear any form of feedback, you know, in terms of what the next steps will be?
Sisa, so I know that the National Command Center met over the weekend and we had our submission there. I said the feedback is potentially looking at 0 to 50. As I said earlier in the conversation, there is another protocol meeting taking place that's been driven by TBCSA. And we're hoping to get that input and document up to date in the next 24 hours for resubmission to TBCSA that will drive it through the tourism department with the help of the minister, through the economic cluster, and then through the National Command Center. And I think the hope that one I personally sit with, and I can't speak that on behalf of like the whole of the SAACI family, but I personally sit with the hope that if I have to get my daughter back to school, then surely I should be able to get the rest of our industry back to working as well, with the number of protocols that we put into place. And as I said before, and I'll continue saying this for a while now, is that we've looked at the World Health Organization's protocols that they've set for our industry. We then have combined that with the Global Association for Exhibitions, UFI. We've looked at what's happened within Germany the last couple of weeks. And then we've also referenced some of the earlier drafts that came. So we've got a comprehensive global document that meets every requirement I think possible. Makes it a bit cumbersome. The concern that we would raise is obviously like who carries that cost, you know, because I said the industry that's already sort of bleeding profusely. How do we then get that cost covered? You know, which leads me to something that I was going to mention earlier, but we also probably need to get guidance from government as to what is their particular role going to be. You know, because government always has these workshops and they have these events over time. You know, where's government sitting on that going forward, and where's their spend going to be? Because I know we haven't touched on it, but on the relief side of things, from a financial side, it's quite important that when we get the green light, you know, that the financial support or incentives are also there for the industry. So we're quite an advanced stage, but as I always say to members or to our board as well, you know, that decision is made by a very big group of people, you know, which is obviously, as we've seen, driven at a scientific level. And it's something that we touched on earlier, is how do you educate people effectively, and more importantly, how do they understand the different categories of our events or conferences over time? You know, that's why I've been trying to change this narrative around mass gatherings versus organized gatherings, you know, hope that they understand it differently. So we're quite an advanced stage, and I'll give my email address to and a couple of email addresses towards the end for people to still contribute. It's a fluid document at the moment, you know, and I think, as Projeni mentioned earlier, the SA Events Council have also got a further detailed document in all aspects. So it's at an advanced stage, but we're hoping to get some feedback in the next, probably, let's say, 7 days, once the National Command Center meets again.
Okay, thank you for that. Projeni?
No comment. I think Glenton has been summed that up pretty well for me.
Okay, perfect. Then, as we draw to a close here, I'm just seeing a lot more comments are coming up on hybrid events, and I suppose that in the short term, while certainly in the COVID environment, you know, digital virtual platforms are going to be the norm. What's your sense around this one? You know, does each individual operator here invest in their own system? Is there a system that everyone can use? What's your sense around the evolution of the hybrid space, and how is that, you know, starting to become delivered?
Look, I think we've been inundated as organizers at this moment. I never realized that there were so many virtual platforms available. And obviously, we've all been fast-tracked into this space very quickly. There are a number of spaces out there, but we as organizers need to be very, very careful about which platform we choose, because it could have detrimental effects on our stakeholders if it goes wrong and if it doesn't operate successfully. So I think we're doing a lot of homework right now. Each organizer is doing their own homework. But yes, if we find something that works, that would be really, really helpful to help us temporarily get through this. If it means going virtual for now, this year, till we're able to operate live, yes, it is definitely an alternative. And then in future, maybe it'll be a combined, it'll be hybrid, it'll be a little bit of both. But again, I would stress to ensure the security of it and making sure that the accessibility, in terms of accessibility from all parts, our attendees and our exhibitors, and that everybody is also able to achieve their participation goals by being on these virtual events. Those boxes still need to be ticked.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, to all the people that are obviously listening and participating here, there is no greater time where it's highlighted the need to actually have a united voice, to belong to associations, and to actually have that consistent flow, that re-education, as it were, you know, from that perspective. The key takeaways, I suppose, you know, in terms of repositioning the mice in the minds of people from mass gatherings, but rather to becoming organized events or organized meetings, which kind of gives a very different veneer to it when you look at it that way. And then whilst, you know, as the easing up or opening up of the sector may not be ideal, you'll be faced with two fundamental things. One is being constricted to a domestic play, as it were. And secondly, the capacity of 0 to 50, will be around with us, at least for the foreseeable future from that perspective. Glenton or Projeni, any last thoughts that you want to express to the team and everyone listening? Words of support and motivation in these very difficult times.
Sisa, probably from my side, I mean, the clarity that I have is that sometimes in life, you need to understand it backwards, but we also have to then live life forward, which is probably sound like a contradiction there. The key here is that we need to, for our sector, which is something that we're working on, and particularly something I've been raising a number of meetings, is that we have to pivot our space. We haven't been funded effectively, and that's no disrespect or sort of calling anybody out in that regard. But we've looked at other aspects of government where we could potentially go and find some incentive funding, and I want to mention these two because I want people to go have a look at it on the DTI website. The one sort of incentive fund is called the Export Marketing and Investment Assistance. That effectively, while it's an outward sort of look where you can obviously look at foreign investment, but it specifically speaks to the criteria of potentially attending a conference or attending an exhibition, where the DTI will then support your business, South African business going out there. Why I mention that one? Because we're going to need and encourage or incentivize corporate South Africa and suppliers within our value chain, within our sector, and they're going to need financial support. Because at the moment, the support that's come out of government, particularly from the Department of Tourism, has not been able to reach our particular sector. And the money is not enough. I think we must be clear about that. The money is not enough, and we need government to know that for all intents and purposes. So how do we then pivot? How do we go to another department and find potential incentives? And that's one area that I think we can pivot quite quickly and quite nicely, because the criteria just needs to change very simplistic in terms of being outwardly focused, but more South African or domestic focus. And then the other incentive, we also DTI one as well, called the Sector Specific Assistance Scheme. That's where I think the SA Events Council and ourselves as associations can go to the DTI, where we then speak to the DTI in terms of our sector specifically for assistance, and more so how do we then create, as they've done in other parts of manufacturing, where they've created actual clusters to build. And I think we need to look at how do we build these clusters, because somebody needs to keep the lights on, and we need to be quite clear. And I think it's something that we've strive to do as an association or as an industry, to inform government that we play quite an important role to the economy. And you mentioned it in another conversation. If we're hosting the World Health Organization in one of our big venues, it's close to 3,000 to 4,000 people coming to South Africa. And one has to look at the success story of Rwanda. Rwanda's built their destination off the back of business events, and I would hate us to sort of just keep us on the sideline as an industry. But I think as we recover, we should be at the forefront of it, because as I said earlier, we are responsible, but we really need to work the government system for funding. Because at the moment, all of us, no matter what industry you are, you'd have to wait for government to activate your economy. And at this stage, our economy is in such a tough space that we're going to have to look at other parts of sectors to drive in that regard. So those are just two I wanted to mention, and I want to highlight the fact that the recovery might seem slow or might feel slow over time, but as we do, the effect is going to be quite important. That for all of us to work together. I think collaboration is something that has happened for all of us, but it's happening at a good time and also in a good space as well. And I think that we can drive our sector forward with time, but we're going to need everybody's hands on deck for all intents and purposes.
Okay, thank you, Clinton. Can you also just maybe in the chat function just put in that email address that you spoke of? So that,
okay.
Kind of do that one, right?
I'll do that,
Projeni?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Glenton. I think support for all the businesses within this sector obviously is really, really important, because when we do come online, we need the infrastructure support. Like I mentioned earlier, it's our ecosystem that makes us survive. And if we don't have these suppliers and service providers, we don't have venues, we don't have events, and we don't bring people into the country to support the tourism industry as a whole. So that is really, really important to bring all of them back online so that we can provide as much support as possible. Because, you know, it's a loss of people and it's a loss of skill. And that's what's really, really important, because there are people that have been in this industry for many, many years and have great skills that we need when we come online. I think it's also very important for us to look internationally. I think, as Glenton mentioned earlier, you know, we're looking at Rhine, Germany opening up their exhibition centers. You're looking at China, you're looking at New Zealand. There's different case studies that we have the opportunity to see. We need to be in touch with them. We need to find out how it worked, you know, what worked and what didn't work, so that we can put that infrastructure and we can put those guidelines in place for us. And that will help us to be proactive in our approach. Whether we're a venue or a supplier or an organizer, we need to be proactive in our approach. At this point in time, we're probably thinking, like Glenton said as well, you know, we might feel like, what do we do now? It's just so slow. And when do we reopen, and when, and when, and when? And we can't wait for that date. But make use of this time now. Do your research, do your homework, put your plans together as to how you would use the new guidelines to organize your event, to present your service. I think that is really, really important, to have those plans in place, be ready, have those safety protocols in place, find out the feasibility, speak to your venues, speak to your clients, like we said. That is really, really important for us to plan and implement. I mean, a classic example I saw this week is if you look at a venue like in Malaysia, the Malaysia International Trade and Convention Center, they posted pics of what events would look like. And they had different scenarios that they posted. And it was really interesting to show what would conferences and meetings look like in their new space. So they've thought ahead of the game, and they're giving us as organizers ideas that this is what it will need to look like. So this is what we need to include in our plans. And as venues here, I'm going to be inviting our venues here onto a platform as well, because I'd like to hear from our venues what plans you have in place, and what we need to think about as organizers in conjunction with your new plans. I think that conversation needs to be ongoing, because let's admit, our exhibitions and our events and conferences, our industry reignites business. It fast tracks different economies and different sectors, economies of different sectors. And we cannot forget that. That is so, so very important. So we have a purpose, and we need to plan and implement and be proactive in our approach and not miss out on this opportunity whilst we all work together to get our industry reopened.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you, Projeni and Glenton, for agreeing to come on the platform and engaging with the sector. We may not all have the answers, but it's through engagement that we're at least going to start to chart the way forward. And I'm quite satisfied that we are starting to make a bit of progress. You know, I think this is webinar number 6 versus the number 1 that we had, where we all were kind of dizzy and in the state. But now I think we're starting to see some form of light at the end of the tunnel. And I would again, please, ask everyone, don't stop contributing, don't stop thinking, don't stop reading, don't stop being curious. As usual, a link will be provided of this recording that you can listen to at a later stage to all those that have registered. And yet again, I think things are moving quickly, things are moving fast. And I think there'll be some major announcements soon, which at least would start to kind of get the wheels grinding again. And again, lastly, thank you very much for listening in, and have a great week. Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.